Challenge against the language used for direct action in our ordinance, and I wonder if you could define that for us.
Okay, which language?
It's direct action.
Oh, the direct action stuff. Yeah, the civil disobedience piece is relatively recently been inserted into a lot of these initiatives. It has perhaps gained the most fame in ordinance passed, which is now a home rule charter in Grant Township, Indiana County, Pennsylvania, which put in a direct action piece. I mean, the concept is that if you know that the law is stacked against you and you know that the law is eventually going to be used against you, that there has to be an escape route embedded into the ordinance or to the initiative, which means direct action is all you have left. I mean, it depends on how badly you want to stop aerial spraying and what you're willing to do. In Pennsylvania, they have a frac wastewater injection well planned, and eventually they're going to have to put their bodies in front of the trucks that come in for the frac wastewater injection well. So we have to be honest with ourselves about how the law works and what legal framework you're putting forward. And if that legal framework eventually gets tossed, you have to embed something in it that allows you to do direct action afterwards. So that direct action piece is probably the most important part of the initiative. I mean, from the long view, because it says, and a lot of times people use those provisions to say, well, that just authorizes anybody to do anything whenever they want. No, it doesn't. It actually has escape valves in it, which say only if the thing is overturned or government refuses to enforce. In other words, if you as a community adopt it and vote to adopt it, and the government refuses to enforce it, the county refuses to enforce, or a court overturns it, which are the two preliminary bases in the beginning to say when direct action kicks in, that if you don't have that, you don't have anything. I mean, you're saying as a precursor, if these things happen, then we're going to release direct action, and the police are prohibited from arresting you for doing direct action to enforce this ordinance. So I, frankly, happen to think it's the most important part of the ordinance, because without it, you're saying we believe in our ability to make a law here that's going to withstand scrutiny. And there's a good chance that it may not withstand scrutiny because it's challenging an existing system of law. So unless you have that escape part, you haven't passed anything. In the end, if a judge strikes that thing, the only thing you're going to be left with is that one paragraph. And you better be damn sure that that one paragraph does what you need to do to leverage what you need to happen. Otherwise, it's pointless. So the corporate boys will pull at anything. I've seen them pull a paragraph apart, rearrange the words, put ellipses in. I mean, they have $200,000 or whatever they spend here. They can do anything. They can make the thing dance. They can cut it up into little pieces and have a photographer make it dance somehow. They can do anything they want to with the thing. You guys could have endless arguments with them. Your job is not to have endless arguments with them, but to have endless arguments with yourselves and your neighbors to tell them why the stuff is built the way it is and what they need to do. And hopefully part of this is the reason, which is they have no other option. You have no other choice. If you want to stop aerial spraying, this is it, right? There's nothing else left for you. This is it. And again, if the judge strikes the whole thing down, the only thing you have left is that paragraph, because you're going to be the ones on the front lines, actually putting your bodies in front of whatever, you know, maybe going to where I don't know anything about this, but going to where the helicopters take off and blocking the helicopters. We don't tend to think about that right now. That's the first time I've ever thought about how it would be applied. But in the end, that's all you got. It all comes down to how badly you want to stop aerial spraying from happening. That's what it's all about. So you may be at a point where you pass the law, you know, people vote for it, and you're in a situation where the judge overturns it and you're left with nothing. So then the question is, what are you going to do? Your only option is to physically block whatever's happening to you. And that provision gives you protection, some degree of protection, from law enforcement that would automatically kick in to arrest you and bring the criminal justice system down on your head. So in the end, that may be the most important paragraph of all, right? And so instead of being on the defensive to try to defend it, you need to go on the offensive and say, this thing shouldn't even be passed without it. And that's why it's in there, because we're loud and we're proud and we're going to stand with this thing because eventually we may need to put our bodies on the line to stop what's happening here. I mean, that's, you know, so you have to get out of the defensive mode and actually begin to hit back. That's what these campaigns are about. Yeah. Okay.
Can we do one more? One more?
Yeah.
Come on, Willow.
Sorry, I know we're over time. I know. There's just two important things. I don't know about this. I'm shaking terribly. Okay, here we go. There's just two more important things that opposition or that, like my own dad decided to turn. He was supporting the issue, and then he said, and a lot of people have said, the fact that they say it's not written well. And you said it's written really well.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I'd like to have at least on the, recorded and everything to be able to help us explain to people why it's written really well, why everything's written that way, or, just your explanation of it. That's one thing. And the other thing is the definition of the word aerial they've been picking apart so much. So I'd just like somebody that we all trust and understand to explain why that is not a problem and why that should not be a reason people are getting afraid. They're afraid they can't spray the bottoms of their boats when they pull them up out of the water with an aerosol that they use for keeping the barnacles off. And they're afraid that they won't be able to use tractor or backpack spraying because it all passes through the air before it lands on what it needs to land on, and how that's different from aerial spraying and why that doesn't need to be defined in the initiative, written out to be obvious. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I'll take the first one. The second one, Rio, we probably talk to him afterwards, or folks from here who are dealing with the initiative, because I don't know the answer to that. I don't know how it's been defended. On the first part, the people who think that the system already gives us remedies are the folks that say these initiatives are not well written. So it's folks that think you have other options within the system that you can pursue, who are the ones that say, oh, that's not well written, it's vague and all those things. The only reason certain portions are in there is because we don't have other options to do anything about the situation that we find ourselves in. And so those have to be written in. And a lot of times the vagueness argument comes and they say, things like, well, what does the corporate rights section mean? That could mean anything. Well, there's language in the US Constitution that can mean anything. I mean, for God's sake, we have due process in the Fifth Amendment. What the hell does due process even mean? Well, it took 100 years of the courts to figure out what due process means. You have to have jurisprudence that evolves those words to have a certain meaning, and those meanings then change from generation to generation in the courts. So some of the vagueness is intentional, which is you want the flexibility remaining in there, especially around the rights of nature stuff, for example, which has never been litigated in the United States. What does that mean for right to flow? What does other words mean about ecosystems and right to life and those types of things? The words mean a certain thing from a plain English standpoint, but they're also meant to evolve. I mean, that's what judiciaries are for, is to actually measure disputes and then explain what the words mean as they interpret it. That's part of the point. So, from my perspective, as a lawyer who's been doing this work for 21 years, that Lincoln County initiative is the bomb. It is, yeah. It builds on all the mistakes and errors that have been done over the past 21 years by other communities, and it seals them. Like I said, I went back and read it this morning just to bring myself back up to speed. It's very good. And if you guys pass it here, that would be a really, shot heard around the world kind of thing. Okay. Lucinda?
So I'd just like to say thank you very much for coming out and speaking with us, sharing your knowledge and the experience you've gained over the last 21 years. For the audience, thank you for bearing with us as we went a bit long. We hope you'll come out and join us again.